On patreon.com/consensusunreality you will find bonus episodes, written content and much more. This recording contains an exclusive follow-up and bonus episode only on Patreon. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show.
Yeah, we're talking about
Very
a bunch
nice.
of different things tonight. Really interesting new book by Diana Pasulka called Encounters. Her
It is interesting.
last book, American Cosmic, kind of rocked the UFO cognoscenti, or
The culture.
the culture. I think it kind of brought some new perspectives to pre-existing themes, which she reapproaches again in Encounters. And it's kind of all the old ghouls from ufological research, Project Blue Book, and
But they're not all ghouls.
just the old haunts, I should say.
Yeah, a lot of them are ghouls, though. You're right.
But it's interesting that topics that are this old at this point, Project Blue Book and the research and
Yeah.
work of J. Allen Hynek. She's obviously also a protege of Jacques Vallee, who she writes about frequently in both of those books. But
Yeah.
as I'm saying, she approaches it with some new angles and also from a perspective that has kind of the renown of at least the American universities and intellectuals, academics.
It kind of made me feel a little bit like she was slipping into not propaganda, but like being a mouthpiece for something. Like it feels, and I know that she's kind of done that publicly for sure. It had less of like the sort of like interesting, like cinematic novelty feeling that American Cosmic had, and it's more of a grab bag of sort of like a progress report on the research that she's doing. And I have like mixed feelings about it, but I think there's some really interesting tidbits in it, and it kind of feels like it might be like a weird like Trojan horse book to get the idea of Rosicrucianism back into the public discourse, because there's all these weird subtle references to it that I found like kind of interesting, and it coincides a lot with what I've been kind of reading on my own, which maybe I'll talk a little bit more about later. But yeah, I wonder, she's definitely going more into taking this sort of UFO thing and bridging it to her interest in religious studies. There's a lot more of the explicit connections to like Archangel Michael and like saints and demons and that sort of, like, it's a bit more explicit about that, which is interesting because she is coming out of this ostensibly like nuts and bolts field, but which the closer you look at it, the weirder and more religious and metaphysical it gets, especially in this book. Like it's almost entirely like petitioning to have the UFO thing approached as a form of spiritual encounter, which I think is the right track, but also like there's going to be like growing pains, I think, in anyone except the weirdest people approaching it from that way, because it assumes a lot about the nature of reality that most people won't ride along with.
Yeah, I agree. And hit record on the Zoom real quick, will you?
Yeah.
As our safety net there. But yeah, I have
Recording in progress.
It does seem that there's like Trojan horse. I'm not sure if it's definitely alluded to the interest that people like J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallee, I mean, she talks about it explicitly in this book, their interest in Rosicrucianism and the connections for so many people, experiencers, to new religions to spiritualism or theosophy and things that kind of rise out of the theosophical movements of the early 20th century. But I did feel that there is kind of an encoded language to a lot of things that are said within this book. And she kind of closes out the book with the concept that, and I think this is kind of the relating theme of encounters, is that the ufological experience, the experience of seeing quote unquote flying saucers or UAPs or however you classify is allegorical. And that's, I mean, it's easy to, that's kind of like seems one dimensional, but who's like, I think what she's pondering in this book is what exactly is manifesting or creating this allegory and for what intent. So there's a lot of really the concept that non-human intelligence, which is the subtext in the title, I think it's encounters with non-human intelligence. There's kind of like a new vague term that seems to engulf artificial intelligence, but also messengers of what she deems downloads. A lot of the people, these kind of industrious figures that she researches, tend to receive downloads as almost technology coming from the noosphere, which is...
Yeah, that whole part is super interesting. The Desjardins, like that theme that kind of comes in and out of the book. My like main problem with the book is it's sort of like it feels often like a weird like left field excuse for like AI, like I don't know, like it's not hysterics, but like the sort of like fanfare and like deification by people like Elon Musk, and like she even has like a blurb from Elon Musk in one of the chapters. It's kind of like, or not a blurb, but an epigraph. So that angle, I just don't think that the emergent consciousness, intelligence, entity thing is the AI thing. Like I get the
we know where you stand.
That perhaps
on that.
No, but I just like I think that obviously, but I think the book kind of like hangs on that as like one of its main thrusts, and so I feel like I've kind of developed how I think about the AI thing a bit since we last talked about it.
God.
But I don't think.
You? Yes.
Yeah,
I mean,
more towards a more forgiving, I think. Approach to it.
I see. Okay, yeah, you've constructively reapproached your position, your
my
intolerant
anti-AI
position.
bigotry.
Yeah.
Hateful man. I like. It feels like it's shoehorned in there in a way that didn't feel like it had much to like. I don't know. It just like it kind of felt like, well, okay, like, but it didn't feel like it really like came to get like, I don't know, like I guess like we have to assume a certain kind of metaphysical multidimensional reality to allow for like AI to become like somehow an emergent consciousness or something. But I guess if everything is already conscious, like if like animism or whatever is true, then of course AI is conscious in the same way a rock is conscious or I am conscious.
But you're conscious in the same way that a rock is.
Yeah, I am.
You
do
love rocks too.
Yeah,
that's cool. Nice little nod there. You got your anti-AI, but also rock enthusiasm in like 30 seconds there. That was sweet.
Some say that rocks are a sort of computer.
Well, that's it's kind of like, I mean, it's not kind of like, but that's Bishop Barclay's the stone punch fallacy was like an argument that he got into, explaining his immaterial doctrine, and the other guy kicked a rock and was like, I refute it thus, like it. But I think the thing that a lot of the people that she's her I think she calls them like colleagues and stuff, a lot, like, because a lot of these people are, you know, hyper successful, and she calls a lot of them invisibles, part of this invisible college, expanding on this idea that Jacques Vallee wrote about essentially scientists and researchers who kind of operate behind closed doors as like almost like a para institution to how we conceive, you know, scientific research and stuff like that. So there is kind of this openness to more metaphysical and fringe topics behind closed doors. But then it kind of goes further into like these people who are who almost operate like in not quite a breakaway civilization, but a civilization that's almost like coexisting but parallel to how you and I live or something. And that's kind of saying that out loud seems oddly pretentious and like insane to assume, but I mean there is kind of like a different context of like these people working in Silicon Valley and stuff, who kind of operate on a different line or something. And that's kind of I guess I'll just stop using all these vague allusions, but
no, I get it.
There's the kind of like some people are attributing this idea of, artificial intelligence, basically that like if mankind rather is Homo sapiens are a type of technology operating for a super intelligence, some intelligence that is, you know, God or something outside of our realm of space-time, then if man stops progressing this inherent consciousness that is imbued within reality, does that super intelligence or super consciousness project itself into like silicon or something? And she kind of talks about the idea that if everything is made up of, you know, these base elements that come from stardust, then, you know, what is the difference between, you know, the divine man and, you know, a piece of silicon or something? But I tend to think that like there's people that she writes about in this book too, that she has, you know, researched and worked with, that talk about the concept of like, we won't really know the face of artificial intelligence when it emerges, because its emergence won't be in some construct that is like the mirror image of a Homo sapien, but that it will be existing within language or something like that. So we may not recognize when this like emergent arrives. And it might be alien to us, you know, which is pretty interesting. But
yeah, I think a few things about all that. First, I found really interesting the chapter on the Ia Whiteley person. It's an early chapter because it pretty plainly admits to like the kind of stuff that Jason Horsley accuses people of in Prisoner of Infinity, of like shaping engineering human beings to like have this desire for space or for like a sort of a technological future through popular culture, but also like literally through like almost mind control experiments on babies. Some really out there stuff like social programming. But then it also brings in this, another person I mentioned a lot is that David Abram person, which comes in very strongly in this chapter about like the relationship we have with like the natural world and our place in the world, and how that sort of plays into like all of this talk about what consciousness is, or what a non-human intelligence means. Like, of course, there's animals that have that sort of form. Some of them like quite advanced. There's a bit about dolphins in there, but it applies just as well to like almost any animal having a sort of non-human form of consciousness and intelligence, even though people argue against that.
Right.
But yeah, it's that. So that was really interesting. But then there's also all this stuff about DARPA. Like she keeps mentioning DARPA, and it's kind of this book must be received so interestingly because half of the sort of people who would be interested in this book, when you say DARPA, it's like, well, this is obviously the deepest pits of evil. Like these are people who are like
Hmm.
sending children forward in time and bringing them back, like crazy, like Montauk Project shit. But like at the same time, it's like for a more popular audience, that's like a legitimizing thing. Like,
Hmm.
oh, the United States like military intelligence and like tech development industry is interested in these questions of the effect of space travel on the human consciousness, or like the way that we change when we start thinking about things in terms of like a global or planetary consciousness, a noosphere or something, or if we try to cross the abyss, like that kind of thing. Um, and then there was also something about, I can't remember exactly what was said, but sort of she was talking about technological bridges between um, communicating between humanity and then the technological bridge of
Hmm.
whatever the given technology is, industry, maybe talking with something else, and then AI as a technological bridge to communicate with perhaps some sort of alien or ultra dimensional
Other, yeah.
entity. Like,
I find,
yeah,
yeah, I think that concept is interesting because she's specifically talking about how, machine learning or artificial intelligence, maybe quantum computing. I mean, we're not going to get into the technical elements of that, but we could. No, we couldn't. But she kind of
hmm.
says that, this could be used as a bridge to kind of obfuscate the noise of, our own perception, the noise of humans.
Yeah,
And that's kind of like a genetic evolutionary thing too, I mean, there's so much, the brain filtering, the concept of perception and senses, getting in the way of some sort of ecstatic contact or some kind of clear uh,
yeah,
contact with a super intelligence, because a lot of these people that she's researching live these kind of weird semi-ascetic lifestyles where they purposefully, don't engage in like listening to the news, and they are keep themselves. And I think what's so interesting
yeah,
about this book too is that what you're talking about, the things that it mentions, it's really hard to pinpoint like, oh, this is a psyop, or this is
right.
questionable, because I think she's approaching this from a pretty honest point of view. And, she's talking about the dangers of social media and the kind of like tech bot armies that are trying to influence all of our social movements and socially engineer us for every which reason. And people who are
Yeah,
pushing back against that, specifically in one chapter, one of the people that she works with, who also happens to be an experiencer. But there is also kind of an anti nuts and bolts, anti space element as well, which is kind of crazy when you put it in the context of somebody like Jason Horsley or something, because he's so anti all of this. But at the same time, there's kind of writing about this invisible college and people who grow up behind the shadow of intelligence agencies, and the kind of strange lifelong engineering that goes on with them and their families not being able to like take photographs of them, and weird stuff that kind of
yeah,
um, it kind of solidifies things that and experiences that Whitley Strieber had in a weird way, where a book like
mhm,
Prisoner of Infinity kind of proposes that it's all this crucial fiction that is built out of, some childhood trauma. But the kind of things that Whitley's talking about with like the gifted children program and stuff when he's younger, this kind of like validates his experiences in this weird way. And especially I thought again about things that Whitley Strieber says about um, the phenomena being like some communication of human evolution, or like an allegory for human evolution, which I
right.
think it also kind of is validated within this book, although she doesn't really talk about Whitley Strieber, but she is involved with the Soul Foundation. I think she's on the board, which is David Grush, and I think it's the dude who wrote the Skinwalkers at the Pentagon book, who I always forget his name.
Yeah, me too. Whoops.
Yeah, and Whitley Strieber was like a keynote speaker at the first meeting of that. So that's all really interesting context.
Yeah, I wonder. I think the thing you said about senses is interesting to me, like using AI as a method to get past our sort of sensory what's the word, like prejudices. Like we're literally prejudiced by the only ways that we're able to interact with the world, which are our senses. But I was talking to someone about this recently, about I think a book I mentioned last time was that Death as an Altered State of Consciousness, and just like thinking about what is it that continues to survive after death. And I think this weirdly does tie into all of this, because like what is it that experiences one of these experiences that, you know, the people have in encounters or in any of these books? What is it, the sensory system that makes up the human like biological thing? Like, is that what experiences this, or is it some sort of like, but then like, because when you sit down and think about like what you are, like as a subject, you're not, of course you're thinking about the sensory inputs that have made up your life, but there's like the thing that is experiencing those inputs, like this sort of like invisible entity like within you that is the thing that sort of watches the experiences of your life go by. This sort of thing that transcends that, like someone with no senses still has an interior life of some kind. So like you wonder like what these experiences are happening to. Are you like, if you have an experience of a dream or a vision of some kind, that's not physically happening to, say, like your eyes or your skin or something.
Mm-hmm.
But like, who is experiencing that? So I think these things kind of call that weird, like, what is the person, you know, into question.
Interestingly is like, what is the makeup of the experience too? Because then calls into question, does AI have a bias because we program it? You know, I guess then it would have to be some kind of emergent, what do you call it? I can't think of the word right now. Some emergent,
like a doppelganger of us.
No, not a doppelganger. Something that it's standing alone.
Yeah, well, it's okay.
Yeah.
I can't.
It would have to be. It would have to be independent. Like it would have to kind of create its own architecture in a way for it to be different, because language itself is a kind of filter, right? Like that's what a lot of what she's talking about is how people.
Language is just senses.
Yeah, it's but like is it symbols too? Because people experience the same things in some of the cases that she's writing about, and some of these are also documented in Blue Book. But you know, one half of that couple will have seen an angel, and the other half will have seen a flying saucer. But it was the same experience in the same room.
Totally. Yeah, the distinction thing is fascinating to me, because that means that there is, if two people are seeing it, it means that there is some objective event happening, but it's an objective event that is subjective more than usual. Like, because all events are subjective to a person, but it's like physical appearance is somehow subjective. Although, I don't know, I guess you could say that about a tree, couldn't you? Like if I'm standing on one side of the tree and you're standing on the other, you might be able to see the woodpecker, and I'd be like, there is no woodpecker. Except maybe I heard it, but I thought that was a jackhammer 5 miles away or something, you know?
Right. And that's what's crazy too, is like, that's why the Phoenix Lights is like something so clearly man-made, because you know, so many people saw the same thing, and it's documented on so many videos as the same thing, that it must just have been like a high altitude V-shaped balloon or whatever, which
I
is,
wonder
I
what
think,
that.
kind
Yeah,
of that's the theory I've seen about that specific case that seems to work and have been, all but admitted, is that it was like high altitude testing of a spy balloon. But it should also be noted, oddly, like that Desjardins' concept of the noosphere seems like this thing that's so applicable to the internet and like concepts of proto cyberspace or whatever. But it is a very Christian concept. Like the way that he wrote about it is essentially almost as an evolutionary part of the omega point of, the rapture or of Revelations, is that it's this Godhead separating and fracturing and then returning to itself, which is also something that's like you commonly hear in a lot of New Age language as well these days.
yeah, yeah. I think all the parts in her book about the noosphere are interesting. They're very tied up with that chapter about that guy Jose,
Mm-hmm.
who had these really interesting, and I found it kind of concerning the way that they tied it into like war, as like the way, like there was this whole sort of part about like war as the thing that initiates like.
Mm-hmm.
And like she even kind of expressed some concern over this too. She was like, "Well, I don't want to like think about, like, I'm a pacifist. I don't want to think about war as like a route to the phenomenon." But
because
at
that's
the
where
same time,
Desjardins,
right, World War One.
Yeah, he formed this concept in fighting on the battlefield of World War One, and then this dude Jose was also a soldier and recognized some sort of like hyper extension of consciousness that happens in these elevated states, and that's kind of the trauma thing too, right? Is this like
That's what I thought of, yeah. Which
weird
it comes back to Horsley's critique again.
Yeah, right.
Which I feel, I mean, yeah, it's kind of funny to, I do bring him up a lot, but I think he's a really
Another
high quality critic of,
an important voice
of some of the some of the like flights of fancy, especially about like the value of trauma, I think. Because that is like it's a common and like tricky thing to talk about, because what you're really saying is like, that's like, if not required, then I don't, like, if that's the path to numinous experience, which I guess throughout religious history often it is.
Mm-hmm.
And like in Christianity, of course, like the root symbol is sort of a traumatic experience itself. And
it's not just Christianity.
I guess
it's also like Masonic
right.
lore too. Hiram Abiff,
True, getting bonked on the head or whatever.
The dying god mythos is kind of
right. The killed king.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. It's really some wild stuff, wild and weird stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing this thing where I was intentionally listening to the audiobook of Encounters, while sort of, on the side of it reading, rereading now, Congratulations, the UFO Reality by Eugenia Macer Story, of course. And I haven't read this since maybe 2016 or so. It's an incredible book, her first, as far as I know, published book. And there's this weird resonance between them. Like, they're both kind of written in these chapters, kind of approaching different angles on the same thing. They both have a very keen interest in, I guess you'd call it like the spiritual or religious or psychic, the non-nuts and bolts approach to UFOs. And some of the anecdotes they tell have like kind of eerie correspondences, and they're both using sort of this pseudonym approach that is really interesting. It was a really bizarre kind of reading experience. Of course, any book about UFOs is going to be a book about UFOs, but also this book is extremely funny. If you can find a copy of it out there, I don't know. She was like really fucking sharp back then, and like having just all these quips. Very funny book. But what I wanted to talk about was this one really bizarre anecdote. So the book is set up as she set up a shop in Salem and then Boston, Massachusetts, and she was doing psychic consultations there. She had a UFO experience that like rearranged her approach to reality, although she was already a psychic, etc. And then she thought, I want to collect information about UFOs, so I'm going to sort of like put a post out there. I think like, a flyer saying, have you had a UFO experience? Come to my office to talk to me about it. And many people did. She got this one call about this guy, and I think it was New Hampshire, he had a frozen lake out behind his house, and he saw a box fall out of the sky. And it fell and hit his frozen lake, and it made a round hole. But it was like a black cube, like a rectangle, and it fell out of the sky, and it made a round hole in his ice. And and this sort of like high strange stuff is like throughout this book. And it's just, it's like my favorite book about UFOs. I'm biased, but it's just like, it's full of that kind of thing, which I love about it. Like the like Keelian kind of like bizarre events that almost feel like they're symbols of something, which kind of also ties into the Pasulka book. Yeah.
Yeah,
what
there's a bit about
squaring the circle.
I know, really, yeah. And isn't the square in the circle is like an esoteric symbol, and also the triangle in the circle was Jack Parsons' symbol that he saw of Babylon, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about some Parsons and metafiction stuff on the back end. But it's interesting because in this book, that figure Tyler, who was such a integral person in American Cosmic, and he was this mysterious character who was hyper successful in the development of in the tech industry and all this stuff, and received these downloads and lived this strangely ascetic life where he didn't have caffeine and didn't have a TV and didn't watch the news, and had this kind of rigorous sleep schedule and all this stuff, but received downloads his entire life from from some other form of consciousness. But he, a couple interesting things in this book. There was one person that Diana Pasulka was researching, and this person was from another country. I think he was Australian, and he basically said that if he started working outside of the United States, then Tyler would have to cut off ties with Diana Pasulka, like reiterating this connection to the intelligence community, and intelligence and national security, which is something that like at times seems to be like, how does that even factor in, but then it comes back in the craziest way that, would ring the suspect bell for a lot of people, obviously. But he also says, in this moment when she's talking about mythology being like a super informational matrix above politics and rational thought, Tyler says to her that the point is not to try and figure it out, which I found is like a very, very curious moment, because this is all she's doing is trying to like get to the root of something, or at least document something, and he's assisted her in this and allowed her access to a supposed UFO crash site in New Mexico near Roswell in American Cosmic. But he's at the same time now telling her like the point is to not try and figure it out, which seems to allude to, I think the point is to experience it and be guided by it or something, but not to try and put a shape to it or something.
Yeah, I thought that was a weird moment because what is studying something if not trying to figure it out?
Mm-hmm.
It's more like a meditative thing if you're trying to just like sit with it. And I don't know. I'm still not like really certain of that person's objective reality, like what that person is or if maybe they're like a sort of like a, what would you call it, like a stand-in for some group, or if they're just if they're really just like an individual person, like I don't know, or like a useful. Like, I mean, I'm sure she would say that, yeah, this is just a real person who needs to be anonymous for obvious reasons, but
Well, he's not anonymous anymore. It's been
he's not.
exposed to it is. Yeah, it's this NASA engineer, I think his name's Tim Taylor.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah, that's who Tyler is. And the other dude who in American Cosmic, who she also used a pseudonym for,
Right.
is
Well, that guy I knew about, Gary
Nolan, who's like a biomedical developer and scientist, and he is now, I think he's part of the Soul Foundation as well, or maybe at least like speaks with them and stuff, or is kind of intertwined into that group.
Right. Oh, so it's just that Tim Taylor, because I've seen that guy around in the various spheres of this thing. I guess that makes sense. Well, that makes it less of a enticing mystery than just like a guy kind of pulling rank on an interested person.
Yeah. But there's something like that in the book, actually, which is insane. She starts corresponding with somebody who is a UFO experiencer and like knows a ton about the subject. And this person, they're kind of becoming close, and she's like researching this person, and maybe it would have been included in this book. But then she kind of, I forget what the venue is, but Jacques Vallee is there, and she's like, my friend would like to meet you, Jacques. Can you give me your read on him? Because she trusts Jacques Vallee, and she like wanted his read on this person.
Yeah.
And he was like, I'm not going to meet that person. And then he basically says like, people within intelligence communities have like a certain look and do and act a certain way. And he says something insane to her where he's like, they get to know you, they get to know your friends, and they get to know your families. And it's like,
Yeah.
super scary. Like there's a lot of, that's
Yeah.
what makes this book so interesting, is like, she was gang stalked a bit after writing, American Cosmic, where she was getting all like her academic email was like flooded and with all this stuff.
We should get her one of our hats.
Exactly. Yeah. Just plugging the merch. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Consensus on Reality merchandise. Items for you and your entire family in the holiday season. It's out there, folks. Go find it. It's linked on our Instagram, but that would be funny. Yeah, I found that stuff's really curious because she really does. She gets led down these paths in American Cosmic and in Encounters where she's interacting with some high level stuff. And I think what kind of set off radars too is that when she got access to that site in American Cosmic, the supposed UFO crash site, God only knows what exactly that is, although I've heard her talk about it more in an interview than she did actually in American Cosmic. And she kind of talks about this craft that almost seems to have like an exoskeleton skin or so. It's super weird. Like, and there's the whole metamaterials thing too. And she talks about like, since writing American Cosmic at Rice University, they had an exhibition of sorts of anomalous materials related to the UFO question or phenomena, which I guess is a lot of, those metamaterials, those kind of materials that are recovered of questionable origin or elemental makeup, They're
probably just quaaludes.
Ludes from the Georgia Guidestones.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole thing is like still a mystery to me. I like the book. At first,
it's the
I was
Invisible
like, this book
College.
is not...
I mean, like that's the whole thing.
Right.
Like it's like
it is. It's
something
the
that's
Rosicrucian
kept
model
from
is
you. Yeah. and that's something that
it is apt.
she talks about a lot in the book too, is the oral tradition of ufology, and what's in the I guess in the military industrial complex realm, it's called pencils up, which means like we're going to talk about things that aren't being documented on paper, you know, so it's kind of that above top secret idea.
It's crazy. Yeah. It's funny actually how the more I think about it, it feels like she definitely read like The Spell of the Sensuous or something by Abram lately, because, or maybe these considerations have finally kind of come to their moment, because so much of like this idea of orality and like the way information is passed down differently inside of language that's written versus language that's spoken, like all of these things kind of come up in this book, that and I kept being like, this is just like that other book, except like applied explicitly to like you know, tech bros with delusions of grandeur and UFO like heads. It's like really interesting.
The concept though that like this, you know, this above top secret oral tradition of I don't know, a secret space program or of ufological related phenomena, like that thing in itself can develop into a secret society, you know, like its own mythology that, you know, it is strange because she's kind of defining that this like movement of secret intelligence is, you know, a secret society within itself and has its own kind of course of rituals and things.
Yeah, it's like a priesthood. It reminds me a lot of like how like shamanic techniques are handed down orally, or how, you know, the whole idea of something being esoteric is kind of what it is.
And there's, I mean, like there's people who would hear us say that and be like, well, yeah, duh. Like, of course there's like, it's the Illuminati, you know, but like, it's easy to just say that without like kind of laying the grounds for how and why that actually makes sense and isn't something like that grand or unreal, like a group out of a H.P. Lovecraft story. Like it doesn't have to be that fictitious sounding. Like it actually just could,
I don't know,
exist and be this like, you know, like secret societies of the past. I mean, it's very similar, you know, like we know that to a degree it exists. I mean, like you can't doubt that there is like a high quantity of, you know, invisible information or like a above top secret oral tradition of the phenomena.
Yeah. Well, and of anything of any value, I think, in military or government spaces. I mean, everything is intercepted now if it's written down on any of the technologies that we've used for the last 30 years. So it makes sense that there would be a tradition of like going back to like a folklore almost among these people, which is fascinating to me. Although it all kind of might just be, it's all very science fiction too. Like this book in particular feels very influenced by like, there's a lot, I don't know how to explain it. There's a lot of like kind of narrativity to it, which I guess is what you need to do to make a book. But at the same time, it's also, a lot of it feels very neat, and like there are arcs that happen. And I know she's kind of combing the details into a readable way for a major publisher, but there does feel to be like a certain amount of artificiality to it that makes me wonder like what the book really is, like what the book's like, because American Cosmics certainly, I'm not saying like, you know, this writer is like some sort of agent or something like that, certainly not, but the book in the end did serve a purpose as like sort of an object in this ongoing UFO thing. And so I'm kind of wondering what the purpose of this one is, or if there is one maybe, or if like she's kind of like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I like still question if it served a purpose or if she was kind of eloquently defining things that were already there, like,
That's
because,
true. But why make it public?
well, I don't think I think she's just like, I'm taking this with a grain of salt, saying that like she's a genuine just researcher and writer, and that, I think she just has a genuine interest in these things. I'm sure other people might say otherwise, having read it or read American Cosmic. But I think if you kind of look back at like a lot of the Space Brothers stuff, and I know a lot of those figures, obviously, we've come to find that they're of questionable character in some degrees, in some instances, and but there's kind of a message there that has been resonant from the beginning of like this being some kind of like evolutionary guiding tool, and that it's, this voice towards man's progress as a species and all this stuff. And it's like, if it was kind of just this sci-fi hyper object, then why didn't it start as like Mars Attacks? Like, why weren't people just kind of like receiving it with this like fear? Well, it kind of arose out of like these theosophical movements and stuff, and that could have all been fiction.
Maybe fear isn't the point. Yeah. It could be that it's not for the purposes of scaring, or controlling people through fear. It might be a much more complicated or ancient approach.
Ancient.
Like, who knows? This could be like the manifestation of a cult that goes back to times immemorial.
Absolutely. That's totally true. And she talks about, the allegory of the cave a lot too, and the Socratic inclination towards the oral tradition, and how the written word which part?
When Jose in the book, the soldier figure, he has this moment where he's going on and on about the word try. He's like, just, try. And I'm like, try? What the fuck? What is try? Why? I'm like, oh, it's Pascal Beverly Randolph's like slogan, the Rosicrucian thing. And that was another moment where I was like, there's like some kind of weird, there's no reason he would be a Rosicrucian. Like, of course, maybe he is, but like, it felt like it was, I don't know. It feels like this is like some sort of attempt to revitalize the Church of the Rose Cross.
That would be so funny.
Not that
it was
dead.
Just like, the whole thing is just like, and it's like in South Park or something, when they get to heaven and they're like, it was Mormons. The Mormons were right the whole time. It's like the whole UFO thing from the beginning. It's like, this was about Rosicrucianism, to revitalize the Rosy Cross. Good ruse. That would be a good one. But that's crazy. I mean, there's also obviously a Judeo-Christian subtext to the things she's writing, and she doesn't even really mention that Desjardins' noosphere is kind of that Christian, has that Christian rapture concept to it, reaching this omega point of returning to the pleroma, and I forget what is the God head called in Gnosticism. I can't remember now.
It's like Bartleby.
That's Barbello. Barbello is like this kind of like
I know.
the Barbello and the pleroma are like these aeonic filters towards the Godhead, but there's a specific name for it. I cannot remember.
It does have a name. I can't remember. I love that they have such a specialized vocabulary.
It's like such a dense, rich cosmology, which is so crazy. But...
Yeah. Bartleby. Bartholomew.
Barbello is like, it's this very important concept in Gnosticism, and the word itself is like, it's kind of a funny like thing. There's a couple of those in Gnosticism, actually. It sounds like a giant,
like Sophia,
like flying dog in a cartoon or something.
Yeah.
Barbello. Come down from there.
Clifford.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Clifford consciousness. That's what we're calling this
Godhead
episode.
is called Clifford.
Hell yeah.
um,
It's an interesting book. I mean, it's coming from a certain place. She's got a lot of really weird connections to a lot of people in the field, and it varying from like the
yeah,
top to the lowest, like rungs on the ladder or something. Like meaning like Twitter, uh, synchromistic personalities and stuff. Like not that
yeah,
like there's kind of weird relationships there and stuff. I just don't think that there's like some kind of what I find so interesting about these books is that it kind of mirrors the phenomena and that it's kaleidoscopic and that there's not like some obvious directive or something, like it kind of just makes you think a lot about things you've already been thinking about in terms of this field in different ways and see
yeah,
them in more dynamic ways. Because people become totemic, when you read about the history of ufology and abductees and UFO experiencers, it all kind of becomes these totems that you, because of your perceptual bias in your
not
mind,
me.
yeah, not you, but anybody who reads it, like you set these people as like these things and these specific events and these experiencers, and you characterize them a certain way. But I think she kind of adds
Yeah,
a lot of depth and shadow to these totems of the ufological phenomena. Flying saucers
I
in the
was like,
sky.
yeah,
Who knew it went
flying
so deep?
saucers. Yeah, I like when she was in Jacques Vallee's library, and she was like, and then he pulled out another book, and I was like, yes, yes. And then she was like, and then he pulled down a book about Satan, and I was like, oh no, not Satan.
Yeah, he
That's
tells
not
her
good.
she has to read this book by the Carmelite
That's like,
nuns
yeah, the
on the
history of
history
Satan.
of Satan. And I looked up what the
Yeah,
book was, and you like people on Reddit are like trying to figure out what book it is. I didn't like look for more than like
yeah,
20 minutes because I was like looking at work or something, but I did find that funny that like it wasn't an easy book to track down. I mean, that's not that surprising because,
yeah.
many books out there, but yeah. But they're
Your
also,
boss is gonna look at your computer and be like, "You're
that's
looking up
cool.
Satan all day."
I have that in my office actually. I have many books on the history of Satan in my office. I am him.
Yeah, I am
No,
Satan.
yeah, but there's something crazy about that too. Is that what do you need a book for? The Carmelite nuns, I guess, have like a tie to Fatima, and that
Oh yeah.
one of the little children who saw Our Lady of Fatima became a Carmelite nun. So there's a weird kind of
Hmm.
connection there, which might be how Vallee, like why that book is so important to him or something, because he wrote extensively about that experience.
That man is a total mystery to me. What a interesting guy.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
I was reading before I got the book. I was reading like reviews of it, and everyone was like, "Oh boy, more of the same. This is really not good." And they were like, "This is not a good book." And then they said stuff like, "This is not worth your time or money." And I was like, "Well, I'm gonna do it anyway."
Mm-hmm.
And at first, I thought the critics were right. I did not need to read this book. I already know all this stuff. But the further I got into it, I was like, actually, this book has some really oddball stuff in it and
Totally.
does kind of push this conversation in if like even just a little further into this weirder direction that I think it needs to go in. So
Yeah.
I actually kind of ended up appreciating it as like a, interesting kind of approach to the whole thing, which is nice.
I think that honestly, you told me that, and I was already halfway through it, and I kind of thought that as a book, it doesn't actually start that strong.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people who have been, researching and reading about this subject for a long time, they kind of like, once you start to bring up these old totemic things about ufology, they're like, well, I already know about that. Like I've heard noosphere before, like, but it's like, yeah, it's like I was saying before, it adds a lot of depth to these things and kind of makes you reconsider them and, consider the absolute complexities of the intelligence community, what intelligence means, and how can the intelligence community function as a secret society that isn't exactly like satanic, or something like a movie, but it's like something that's, far more complicated and harder to wrap your head around. And not just that, but many, many other aspects of the thing as well, which makes her books, I feel, very important. But she also talks about how the medium of the book itself is problematic in this field, because she's writing at a time when there's so much all the releases and the things that are going on. If you've been interested in UFOs, it's easy to just say like, well, that's all psyop, that's just garbage, and it's all propaganda. And sure, a lot of it is, but there's still a lot of, totally strange, weird stuff getting filtered through the mainstream media and collective unconscious of the world.
You mean the lamestream media?
There you go. So she kind of finishes the book writing about like developments in Chat GPT, and that's already like what?
It's already old news.
Yeah, old news. Like now it's
just
like
garbage.
Other breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, and they just apparently took a massive step. OpenAI did towards their goal.
Or like took a massive
Ben's
dump.
Nightmare.
They can't create me. I mean, my nightmare. I am my nightmare.
They could create you.
I'd love to have a chat robot based on me.
That's my nightmare.
Actually, no, I think I'd rather have one on Elvis, an Elvis chat robot.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess the last thing I'll say, though, is that if religion is the kind of this mimetic like force that changes and shapes society, then I don't know, the UFO thing, it does seem to be becoming something that's kind of replacing, or at least changing the face of the world. I don't know. I guess at least the Western theology, I should say. Can't say the world theology because that's
who knows,
a step way too far. But the Western theology, for sure, yeah.
I don't know. Well, maybe there's some connection to the UFO thing in any religion. I mean, of course, shows like Ancient Aliens or whatever will look at, the Hindu or, tradition, the Buddhist tradition, and find UFOs everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, but this current iteration is definitely heavy on the Western, especially American thing, which
it's so technological.
Does kind of make it feel, and that's what makes it feel like maybe it's I don't know, it's confusing. Like I said, it's an enigma.
Yeah, it's like, a lot of what she's talking about too is like considering our evolutionary genetics as an inscription of quantum information, but also, like considering our development as a species to be a technology of some, inherent exterior consciousness or super intelligence. Yeah. I mean, all of that language is stuff that is kind of like in vogue with our Western civilization.
It's very trendy. Yeah, AI speak and like everything's a computer, man. Like
Hmm.
uh it's all like, but none of it's true. We just made a new toy and now we think we look like it. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think it's gonna pan out. But it is interesting and it's a new angle, which I guess is helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about, did you read that, from Corazon to Carcosa, fiction-based esotericism in the Black Pilgrimage of Jack Parsons and Marjorie Cameron?
I did have a look at that essay. That is by Manon Hedenborg White.
Yep.
You can
Really
find
kind of
this
interesting.
episode in its entirety and more exclusive content at patreon.com/consensusunreality.